So, obviously, last week we started our deep dive into the Sermon on the Mount, the longest recorded sermon of Jesus. And I think it's really important that we remember through this whole process that all of this sermon is directed to Jesus's disciples, directly to his disciples, followers of Jesus, by extension, us as well. And it's teaching all of us how to live as citizens of his kingdom, right? So they're not simply good standards or principles for life. This is the way of life for a believer within this message. And even though I've divided the verses into 6 segments for studying purposes, Jesus intended them to all be connected. They shouldn't be disconnected from each other. He intended the entire message to flow with a particular train of thought under the theme of citizens of his kingdom, okay? So Jesus started with the attitudes that we talked about last week, the Beatitudes that drive our behavior, which, and at the end, Jesus explained that all who take on these characteristics and portray them can expect persecution, right, for that righteous behavior and that expression of faith. So in your own mind, in your own life, what happens when we come up against someone degrading us or attacking us or persecuting us for our faith and our righteous behavior? I mean, you had a response, right? All of us have a response. Typically, it's going to be our natural tendency is honestly either to battle back with an equally aggressive manner, which is to fight, or many of us tend to withdraw from the conflict and go back in our shell and hide, which is flight, right? That's our natural tendency to persecution. But Jesus, based on this next section that follows, blessed are those who are persecuted, he says, nope, that's not going to happen. Not going to allow that, right? Because the role that Jesus intends for us is to engage in the world even when facing persecution, because it's right after Jesus promises blessing for those who are persecuted that he tells us not to withdraw, but to engage instead. And he tells us how in our passage today to engage. Matthew 5:13 through 16. We'll read the whole thing together. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So the first thing that we should understand and take from this passage is that our faith and our commitment is not just about us. We talk about that all the time, right? He's saying, go out and be something in the world. And the reason God wants us to operate under the Beatitudes and the behaviors that we talked about last week is because he wants to do something in us so that then he can do something through us. So we always have to go back and start at the beginning of this sermon, no matter where we are as we go along in the reading and the studying of the sermon, okay? He has to continue doing something in us to do something through us. So here Jesus is saying, you are not to write the world off, but rather be engaged in the world. And Jesus specifically uses the analogy of being salt and light. So let's dissect what all this means, because per usual, there is so much more that Jesus is saying than just saying salt and light, okay? So they have strong cultural meaning that they would have understood by hearing Jesus say these words. So according to the culture at that time, let's talk about the deeper meaning behind Jesus's commands to be both salt of the earth and light of the world. Number one, most people don't understand this, but both are complements. Jesus is actually elevating his disciples by complementing them. So with each section, we're going to start with salt and then compare it to light. So let's start with salt. At that time in culture, Salt was extremely valuable. In fact, in many times and spaces and places at that time, Roman soldiers would receive their pay in salt. Their wages was given to them, not by coins, but by a pouch of salt. It was that rare and that precious. The Latin word for salt, which is what Romans spoke at that time, was salarium. And it means to give salt. And it's where we get our English word for salary. Everybody hears salary and it's like, oh yeah, give me, pay me. That's precious to me, right? That's what salt meant when they heard those words at that time, okay? All that to say, salt had major importance in the economy. So much so that if you spilled salt, you were outwardly shamed and disgraced. This was news to me, but I heard one scholar talk about when Leonardo da Vinci painted the Last Supper, he painted Judas Iscariot spilling the salt shaker on the table in front of him in order to portray his shameful betrayal. I had to look it up and go. If you look up salt shaker, Judas, and Da Vinci, you will see it circled. There's the salt shaker spilled out on the table. That's how precious and valuable salt was. So when Jesus is saying, my disciples, you are the salt, you are precious in the world and you are valuable in my eyes. The same is true for being called light, because at the time in Jewish culture, it was common to elevate particular prominent rabbis, the rock star rabbis, as being the light of the world. They would be given that title. Not all got this verbal attribute. Only the elite rabbis were called the light of the world. But Jesus looks at these, you've got to set the setting. Jesus is looking at a lot of these scruffy fishermen, these tax collectors, these farmers, these peasants among his disciples. And he says, you are the light of the world. These men never thought of themselves as significant. It must have seemed ridiculous to them at the time that they would say, Jesus would say that because they are used to their rabbis being referred to that. But Jesus is bringing it on their level. You lowly Galileans, the scum amongst all Rome and most Jews, you are the light of the world. You are going to make an impact, which they did. So if you ever feel small and insignificant, struggling to make a difference, you've got to remember what Jesus was saying when he says, you're the salt and light. You are the elite and you are precious. And Jesus says that to each of us as well. But more than that, when Jesus says these words, and Matthew dictated the words and wrote his gospel, when he wrote, you are, he used an emphatic plural. I mean, y'all, all y'all, but also you and you alone is what he's saying, are the salt of the earth. My disciples, you and you alone, will be the salt and the light of the world. You are, is what he's saying, the only hope this world will ever have. And if you don't do it, the world won't have the hope. So being referred to as salt and light of the world shouldn't only make us hold our heads up high and keep from cowering that we are part of God's redeeming qualities, but it should give us courage and drive us to obey this command. Because it's not just a compliment, it's a command, right? And as part of the command to be salt and light, we have to understand, number 2, both are to enhance the quality of life. Again, let's start with salt. Most of us think of salt as nothing more than something we use to season our food, right? Personally, I love salt to the degree that Dave will tell you he has threatened to buy me a salt lick. It's true. Salt enriches the flavor of food. I love salt. I will often salt stuff before I taste it. I'm one of those. But more than that, we all know our bodies need salt, because when we are depleted of salt or low on salt, people can develop hyponatremia, and can result in death, right? Even athletes who work out to a significant degree, they have to replenish the salts that are lost through their sweat, right? So it's very important to the body. But at that time, to make a reference to salt was so much more than what we understand it. Not only did it add value monetarily, but it was often used not figuratively, but definitively for adding quality to life. Colossians 4:6 says, Paul writes about how to specifically encounter unbelievers, saying, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, so that you know how to answer. So we're not to be salty. That doesn't add quality to life. We're to be salt in the terms of we increase flavor, right? But we also know that salt increases thirst. If you've ever eaten a lot of salty chips, guess what? You're drinking a lot of water, right? So in Greek terminology, seasoned with salt actually means to flavor your words in such a way that we create a thirst in others for what we have by our words and by our actions. We add salt to our words in such a way that their life seems tasteless and dull, and they are thirsty, craving that living water, right? So as a result of our words, unbelievers can develop a desire for a better quality of life, thirsty for a better quality of life. So that means with every encounter we have, we can leave a better taste or we can leave a bitter taste. Or we can leave a bland taste. We get to choose which it is. Which is why Jesus says, if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing. There's the bland. There's the neutral, right? There's the lukewarm, if you want to go back to the Revelation passages with the 7 churches. It will be good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. That was actually a practice for salt that had gone bad, that was good for nothing back in those days. They would throw it into the streets and let it just crumple under everybody's feet and whatever. But how does salt get unsalty? It becomes contaminated. It's impure. Now, spiritually speaking, this isn't about losing salvation, but this is about losing our impact and our influence in the world, right? If we are so influenced by culture, our salt is becoming tainted, that we become like culture and we blend in. That's when we become worthless. And sadly, there are people who profess to be Christian, but behave so badly that they leave that bitter taste, not a better taste. They aren't living up to the standards that Jesus clearly laid out in the Beatitudes. Therefore, that is the salt that has lost its value. It's lost its seasoning. And it's in the church. So we have to very well guard ourselves about not being contaminated as the salt of the earth. What about light? We take light for granted, right? We have lights everywhere now. We have headlights. We can drive at night. We can do anything at all hours of the time and day and night because we have plethora of lightage, right? But back then, when it got dark, everything stopped. Most were done working and would go inside and light this small oil lamp. Life, for the most part, paused until the sun came back up again the next day, right? And then you think about the light of fire, truly how it enhanced the quality of life when fire was introduced into man, right? It was considered a symbol of life, right? So that light of fire is a symbol of life. Think about sunlight. Without sunlight, vegetation dies. And even people's quality of life, our human quality of life, is disrupted without sunlight. People in the northern regions, I deal with it myself, suffer in that low light conditions with the seasonal affective disorder, right? Some people have to sit under lights for their mental health during those darker seasons, especially the further regions in Russia and Alaska. I remember when we went to pick up Colson, it was summer and it was daylight all but 4 hours or so of the day. But when we went to pick up Macy, it was dark all but like 2 hours of the day. Like the sun would barely start to rise and then it would go back down. That was a depressing trip, I'm telling you. And I felt it. And all of us in the northern region here in Washington, we feel it as well. But Think about that as the spiritual light. Spiritual light is even more important. If that's how sunlight alone increases our vitamin D and our mental health, imagine spiritual light and the role that it plays, right? Philippians 2 instructs us on how to behave like light. Paul says, do everything without complaining and arguing. Pause. That's where we lose not only our light, but that's where we become salty. When we step into complaining and arguing in front of unbelievers, we become salty and we darken the light that we are shining, right? Why does Paul say that? So that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in the world. That's how we do that. In a world full of crooked and perverse people, he's saying your light needs to shine, be better than, not better than in perspective to God, but be better in your behavior, be better in your attitude, be better in your speech than what the world sees, so that they see that difference. And as the light of the world, we are to shine in such a way that people see true spiritual life, not just life on earth, but life beyond earth, the eternal life beyond this life. People need the hope of Jesus, true life. And that's what we are to light within the world. We should be offering life-giving hope to a corrupt and dying world, adding flavor in such a way that the people notice, because this corrupt and infected world needs salt and light. Which leads me to number 3. Both salt and light have preserving, purifying, and healing qualities. So in the ancient world, it was necessary to preserve meats by packing them with salt to keep them from rotting. It slowed the growth of bacteria and the decay of the meat so that they would have food to eat. Salt also had medicinal value to heal wounds as an antiseptic. In fact, according to Ezekiel, when a baby was born, they would rub salt all over it. Not for roasting, but because it was a good antiseptic to kill off any germs, bacteria, or diseases that may have passed while going through the birth canal. So Jesus is saying you are to be a preserving influence in the decay of the world. If the world around you is immoral and unethical and in spiritual decay, your presence is to help slow down the process. We should help heal the world around us in our schools, in our workplace, in our family. We should be a blessing wherever we go. We should leave each person and space and encounter better than when we found them. We are preserving by doing that. Light is also a good disinfectant used to kill bacteria, germs, and viruses. Germicidal ultraviolet technology, which is a method of disinfecting and killing bacteria and germs, has been around for over 100 years now. And they have proven that 15 minutes, this was astonishing to me, 15 minutes of ultraviolet C exposure in SARS patients, a respiratory illness, inactivated SARS, making it impossible for it to replicate. Light has power to heal. Light has healing properties. It can treat eczema, dermatitis, and other skin conditions. I could go on and on and on. Laser lights are used to treat scars and surgery and repair eye issues, right? All of this to say that the people of this world, the people of this earth are infected. They have satanic germs, if I may. So when we stand for righteousness, it has a healing effect on those around us. Our Bible values have a purifying effect. We can heal the nation, which is what God meant when he said, 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people, but notice he says, my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their land or forgive their sin and heal their land. That's God's people doing the activity, but others benefit from the healing in the process. We can't expect We say this all the time. We cannot expect unbelievers to act like believers. God is calling believers to act like true disciples and true believers and true followers of Jesus to lead the way to true salvation and sanctification for the unbelievers. Everyone, all of us, is infected by sin, and the prognosis is death. And what we have to offer is a remedy by way of Jesus. When we operate as salt and light, we bring healing. We stop the rot of the world around us from going off the deep end. You think it's bad, but our presence is stopping it from going off the deep end. We are to disinfect and stop the spoilage of the world. Imagine what it will be like in the rapture when all of the salt and the light that Jesus claims are the only hope of the world are taken out, right? We are considered to be the restrainer, the reason the enemy cannot have full reign over the earth right now. That's what it means that we are salt and light. We are coming against and we are disinfecting the sin around us. It is the followers of Jesus who keep the decay from taking over, not Buddha, not Muhammad, but followers of Jesus, with our prayers and our righteous influence reflecting the behavior and heart of Jesus. So if we do such good in society by our presence, then why aren't we appreciated more? Why are we marginalized for our faith? Why are we made fun of? Why are we persecuted when we pour out our salt and light? Well, what happens when you pour salt on an open wound? It hurts. When we speak up and do good, it convicts the hearts of the unbelievers, and that is painful. What happens when you've been in the dark for so long and you finally walk out into the sunlight? It hurts your eyes. Your eyes have to adjust. It takes time. Exposure is painful for those who are accustomed to living in the dark. It's important that we are committed to the process of purifying and healing. It's not usually a one and done deal, a one and time encounter. We have to be committed to the process by committing to stopping the corruption. It has to be our focus. Have you ever had a coworker or a family member or somebody cuss around you or try to tell a dirty joke or something, but somebody else who knows you says, oh, they won't like that joke. Oh, they're a Christian. They don't want to hear that kind of language, right? That's part of keeping it at bay. That's part of being a salt and a light, where somebody notices that I'm going to change my behavior when I'm around you, right? That we stand up against it enough that people know our values and our morals. That is a small and impactful way to stop corruption. We are making somebody notice by how they behave around us. The question is, are we so comfortable with people sinning around us? Are they so comfortable sinning around us? Or are they more guarded in their sin, that they're called and convicted by our presence? Bottom line, salt is needed because the world is rotting and decaying. And if our faith is also rotting and decaying, it's not going to be much good, right? Light is needed because the world is dark. They're blind to their sin and the death that awaits them. We have to be distinctly different. We can walk courageously knowing that both salt and light also, number 4, both have penetrating properties. Salt penetrates food and gives it flavor. It doesn't sit on the outside, it gets on the inside, right? Light penetrates darkness by making it brighter. They both invade whatever space they are in, and so should we. There's nothing passive or neutral about salt or light. They are active working agents, and so should we be. They elevate merely by their presence. And we are to penetrate our culture by being present and make a difference in our world. One scholar wrote this. He said, rub the salt in the decay. Turn the light on in the darkness. Don't be a strobe light. Don't be a dimmer switch controlled light, choosing how bright you want to shine and when you want to shine. Don't be a laser light show. Your light should be simple and steady. I love that. Ephesians 5:8-14 goes hand in hand with what Jesus is saying about being the light. For once you were full of darkness, but now you have light from the Lord. So live as people of light. For this light within you produces only what is good and right and true. Carefully determine what pleases the Lord. That's a verse we could focus on every single morning. I want to carefully determine what pleases the Lord for my day today. Verse 11, take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. We don't hide from them. We don't fight them. We expose them. There's a big difference, right? Verse 12, it is shameful. This one really hit me when I'm studying. It is shameful even to talk about the things that the ungodly people do in secret. Why is that a warning for us? Because what comes out of our mouth, what we talk about, what we chew on, are the things that we're processing in our head. And that chewing on and processing what the ungodly do in secret is replacing the opportunity for the light of God, the truth of God, to be in our speech. But their evil intentions will be exposed when the light shines on them. We don't have to talk about them. We just expose, right? For the light makes everything visible. Jesus says, let your light shine before men, not shine it in their eyes, but to illuminate their surroundings. And our light doesn't just dispel the darkness, it's to help show them the way out when they are asking for a way out. So when true disciples of Jesus, each of us are shining steady and bright and consistent, and we gather together in our homes and in our workplaces, in our family, that light grows stronger and more powerful in the world. So this God-given mandate is about getting off the sidelines and getting into the game, influencing the world around us to the point where our faith should not be private. It should be in a place where others notice. Verse 14, Jesus said, you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. We are to be seen and noticeable from a distance. Verse 15, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to the whole house. So they could have a little small lamp that they would use to light their home, but they would put it up high so that the light would flow over and overflow into the space. Jesus knew the hearts of man so well that it would be tempting for us to hide our lights because people will hate the light that he wrote that verse in here. Jesus calls us to be intentional, putting it high enough for all who are in the house to see. Let's dissect that for a second. All who are in the house to see. Do you let your light shine before all who are in your life? Or I'm going to call myself out here, am I grumpier with my spouse, but more patient and kind with my friends or coworkers? Our light has to shine first and foremost at home to those who are closest in proximity to our lives. Here's a question. Are we the same salt and light to our parents, to our kids, to our siblings, and friends across the board? Are we so busy trying to get to the next space that we forget to be salt and light penetrating in the moment that we've been placed in? The salt and light aren't just for those we like or aligned with, but it's especially for the world in darkness and the decay around us. Jesus said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. And for what reason? To glorify your Father in heaven. That is the purpose of us being salt and light, not so that we are elevated in our pride or our, ooh, look what I did, but so God will be glorified and they will find their path to God. Let me end with this quote from a well-known theologian. His name was John Stott. He died many years ago. But he says this: If the house is dark at night, there's no sense in blaming the house. That's what happens when the sun goes down. The question to ask is, where's the light? If the meat goes bad, there's no sense in blaming the meat. That is what happens when the bacteria are allowed to breed unchecked. The question to ask is, where's the salt? If society becomes corrupt like a dark night or a stinking fish, there's no sense in blaming them. That's what happens when fallen human society is left to itself and human evil is unrestrained and unchecked. The question to ask is, where's the church?